Hey everyone, it's LS, and this is going to be the Volibear first impressions video on his rework. The aesthetics of the champion looks really cool, and after seeing the reveal and seeing the way that they ended up portraying him and the way that they built up to it and everything, it doesn't quite surpass Fiddlesticks's rework, but I think that it's actually still above Warwick for me, which is, I think, maybe going to be very surprising for some people. Anyway, this rework actually does look like it's geared towards being a success, even though Volibear has been showing up in pro play, in top lane, and even in the support role, and having a lot of success there. He was obviously not one of the most popular champions for the last couple of years, and I believe that it was he ended up getting voted into one of the rework champions, I believe. So, nonetheless, Volibear Rework seems like it is slated towards a pretty big success without actually changing a whole lot of an identity, and it feels like they actually managed to fix one of the problems that was gating the previous Volibear the longer that the game would end up going on. So let's just jump right into it. This is going to be a shorter first impressions video because there's not a whole lot to work with. The actual reveal video isn't as long or detailed as the Fiddlesticks one, and then this page just basically has all of the abilities covered, but it doesn't go into detail on the ratios or the range or anything like that. So his role is still going to be a fighter, and they still have put his difficulty at low. We move into the abilities, and the Relentless Storm. Volibear's attacks and abilities grant attack speed. Eventually causes basic attacks to deal bonus magic damage to nearby enemies. So if you look at it on the right, over here, seems like he auto-attacks a couple of times, and then he gets the chain lightning effect. If you played Season 1 or something of TFT, maybe you would remember a Volibear with the, was it the rapid fire cannon, or just whenever he would start chaining his enemies. Now, the question for me is, how far does the lightning reach, and what is actually the damage on the lightning? And that ends up being the question for me. Does it also apply on-hit effects? Because if it applies on-hit effects, well, now things do get a little bit dicey with this, especially because of the way that this champion is likely to end up building. You're thinking about items like Blade of the Ruined King, or you're thinking about items like Wit's End, or even Titanic Hydra, and things of that nature. So I think it's a really interesting passive. Obviously, it's extremely basic, but it has potential to be a really good passive, scaling into the later stages of the game, and also even helping him out with wave clear, so I think that's nice as well. Moving into the Q ability, Thundering Smash. Volibear gains speed towards enemies, stunning and damaging the first one he attacks. So this is very akin to his old charge, and now they've combined it with a pretty basic stun attached to it, so it's not a flip anymore, so it's very akin to Udyr. This immediately comes to mind now, putting him towards support jungle and top primarily, combined with his passive, so we'll have to go into more of his abilities to try to figure out where else could he end up landing. Again, there's no ratios here. We don't really quite know what the movement speed increase is, or if it scales up with points put into it. I think that it's just very basic. It's very akin to the old one, so I think that it's good, it's healthy. W. Frenzied Maul. Volibear damages an enemy, applying on-hit effects and marking them. Casting the spell again on the same target deals bonus damage and heals Volibear. The bonus damage is a really key point, because I'm curious if this has a max percentage health, or if it has an execute on it, or if it has a percentage health modifier. Anything like that is really key in affecting how this champion can itemize. Again, it's very simple, and there's nothing, impacting his kit, giving him any sort of insane steroids or any sort of smoke and mirror gameplay right now. This is really looking something akin to Set, but when we get to his ultimate, that's where things do begin to get a little bit nice. The E, however, is also nice. Sky Splitter. Volibear summons a lightning bolt at a location, dealing damage and slowing enemies while granting Volibear a shield if he's inside the blast radius. So this is really good, because it means that he potentially has reliable poke inside of the lane. This is both a supportive ability when he is playing bot lane, potentially, if he's going to be put into the support role, but also this is really good even in top lane. It's good as a jungle. It's good if you're playing mid lane or something. It's just overall a really nice ability that has a lot of synergy with his kit, but also gives him some added utility to play out a laning phase if he's losing a little bit, or he just wants to try to poke down an opponent that is refusing to interact with him. So in that regard, they've managed to keep his kit very, very simple, from the passive all the way to his E ability, and then when we move into the R, Stormbringer, Volibear leaps to a target location, slowing and damaging enemies beneath him while gaining bonus health. Enemy towers near his landing location become temporarily disabled. So they've managed to combine the item Ohm Wrecker with his ultimate. From what it was looking like in some of the videos that they did during the reveal stream, it looks like it's about a 1.5-second disable on the turret. Perhaps it scales up with rank or points added into it, so maybe at rank 2 it increases, maybe at rank 3 it increases again. I'm not totally sure on what that is. The growing in size, I'm curious if it has the same interaction as something like Cho'Gath does, where it can maybe modify his abilities range, or if he's able to just select champions. I think that's really big. But the real takeaway for me on this R is that it covers up a lot of the weaknesses that the previous Volibear had, where the previous Volibear had one mode, and that mode was always basically to go into the opponent. But when the opponent had flash up, or when they started getting their utility items, or if they were just much stronger than Volibear, or if Volibear was behind, he didn't have a reliable way to get onto the opposition. He didn't really have a way to help his team do anything unless he was getting aid from another champion in the game, such as if he was being in support and being attached to a Callista, Callista could throw him onto the opponents, and he could find synergy there. Stormbringer helps him in a way by combining his basic kit with essentially almost a Malphite ultimate of sorts that allows him to get onto the opponents, and then with the E in synergy, thus granting him a shield. So if this is going to be an off-tanky or a bruiser tank, I don't even exactly know, because again, the ratios are unknown at this point in time. His E and his R have insane synergy and allow him to actually set up for his team, whereas the previous Volibear was much more reliant on the opponent's mistakes in order to set up and engage, unless he was very, very far ahead or had lots of champions on his team that would be able to enable him somehow. So this new Volibear just looks much better than the old one in terms of just sheer utility and sheer things that it's going to have going for it, whereas the last one was just a giant stat checker that had some utility. This one has much more. It has poke, it has shielding for itself, it has wave clear, depending on, again, where it's going to end up being, and then obviously the passive can maybe interact into the jungle. Yes, he doesn't have terrain scaling, but again, depending on his ratios, maybe that just means that he can take Predator or something and come in that regard. The R is obviously fantastic for diving and setting up ganks with your jungler, even if you're not going to be the jungle. So I think that his role is going to be entirely decided by the ratios. One of the things that does immediately come to mind, though, is that if he doesn't have percentage max health or some sort of missing health or max health on himself or something to the opponents, I think it gets a lot harder to be jungle, because that probably means he's going to be much more reliant on base levels. He's going to be much more reliant on having gold so that he has items, so that he's oppressive to the opponents, and that would then make him fall in line similarly to Set, where even though Set has been appearing in the jungle, it's no doubt that he functions a lot better as a top laner, or if you're actually just picking him for a sheer utility and for early game oppression, then in the support role, obviously he finds some success there, while it is a lot more rare that he gets pivoted into the mid lane as time continues to pass. So Volibear, to me, sort of feels like he's having the same function. I think that Riot did a really good job at keeping his kit very, very basic, and I think that with the added utility coming in from his E and his R, it makes Volibear a much more worthwhile champion than the previous version that was existing in Summoner's Rift. I'm not sure when this is going to end up hitting the Rift, but as long as his numbers aren't super, super terabad, I could definitely see this being one of the bruiser tanks that could come out of top lane, given that we don't really have a whole lot of them right now that are truly tanks. Obviously, we have bruisers that sort of either act as assassins or they're very, very heavy damage dealers without really taking on a tanky, peeling kind of aspect with a lot of utility going for them. Malphite has popped up. Maokai obviously has been coming back a little bit. We saw things like Zac popping up sometimes in competitive play and even in solo queue, but this really looks like the champion is geared towards taking on that role, and I think that's going to be really good. So we'll have to wait and see what his ratios are. I think this rework is a complete success, just looking at the abilities. This is making me feel very akin to even the Aatrox rework, where I just feel like they did a very good job at giving the champion more options and more access. I know some people will complain that the current Aatrox it ended up being a failure in some ways because it was so hard to balance for such a long period of time, and now with him missing his numbers, it obviously does hurt him a little bit, and they would say that the old Aatrox, just when he was starting to get play, he ended up getting reworked, and maybe they would even liken that to what's happening with Volibear right now, but I really can't stress enough that I think that his E and his R just helps change the champion so much, but yet keeps him feeling like the old champion. So let's just go into some of the skins. Normally I only do this on a patch rundown, but I'm thinking that Volibear is looking a little bit big right now. Somehow, Sky Williams has sensed that Volibear has been reworked, and he woke up in a very big pool of sweat, and he's honestly, he's looking a little bit thirsty. But anyways, the base skin obviously looks really cool. It just looks like a giant thundering bear. I think that they really do capture the essence of him feeling like a mythical creature or like a demigod feature, and taking that on. The Thunderlord Volibear just looks like he's in combat. It doesn't really seem like there's anything to discern with this skin and the base skin. It just looks like he's angry here. The Northern Storm Volibear, this instantly makes me think someone fed Kennen a little bit too much. I think that you probably wouldn't leave this Volibear alone in the pantry if there was an apocalypse event going on, and you would find all the stored food. Immediately coming to mind is the Negan from the Walking Dead joke, when he was talking to Rick about who was watching over all of the food. And that's one of the first jokes that's coming to mind. You can look that up on YouTube if you don't know what I'm referring to. Perhaps you stopped watching Walking Dead, and I would say to you that Season 9 and 10 is back to the really good days. But anyways, Rune Guard Volibear. Obviously, we can't totally see the skin, but I think that's totally fine. This looks just like kind of old Volibear. It doesn't really look like too much of a difference. Captain Volibear. I saw the skin in-game, and for some reason, it really just looked like, it reminded me of Boy Meets World, Mr. Feeney, I think was his name or something. It just looked like Mr. Feeney grew a beard, and I couldn't help but feeling like the skin was really out of place. If there's ever going to be a skin that one of the rework champions has where Reddit is going to complain, I think it's going to end up being this one for Volibear. El Rayo, this is the same exact thing. It's sort of another one of like Who Fed Kennen if you end up looking at the skin in game. It really looks like Pikachu got into the sweets. Pikachu had a little bit too many cakes, and he had too much time at the bakery, if you see that in game. I think this is the best skin, just by far. It almost looks like a totally new champion, and if it was a totally new champion, I would have no problem with it being a new champion. This skin is so sick, and when I saw it during the reveal, I just thought, wow, like, I need to get that skin, and you need to get it too by going into the Riot store and making sure to get it when you get Volibear. Not trying to sell it or anything, but this is by far one of my favorite skins on our champion in the entire game. So I really, really like the aesthetics. I like how it makes you feel. I like how it really just transforms the champion, and it gives some sort of like a Warcrafty vibe to it, and I really like that. So all in all, recapping on the champ, I think that the rework is slated to most likely be a success all around because they've kept everything that old Volibear basically had, and rather than just making him rely on being a stat checker and getting really good trades in lane in order to get grossly ahead of the opponent and then be oppressive through having higher base levels or higher CS counts in gold and really relying on that to carry home the game, it feels like they've given him the utility that is necessary to shore up the previous weaknesses and actually allow him to interact with his team more without having that reliance on being oppressive. And so in that regard, I think it's really good. And I'm looking forward to playing this champion and figuring out where he's actually going to be. I think that he might fall victim similar to Set when it comes to the jungle, but perhaps not because of his R, but then also because he does have the gap closing ability on his Q that is maybe a lot more reliable than something Set would have. So maybe also his ratios are just a little bit better in his E setup. I'm not totally sure. So I have high hopes. He could end up, in my mind, in 3 potential roles as it currently stands, but we'll wait and see what ends up happening. So thanks for watching this video, guys, and